Congratulations on finishing a mammoth task of writing Future Jaw Clap, which I know is going to be a valuable resource for many generations. So,
thanks, man.
Yeah, congrats.
Thanks.
I just wanted to, I wanted to start with digging down about who you are, because I feel like I've had the privilege of knowing you for a long time now and know of the many adventures you've been on and the curvature of your life, and which I think is really fascinating. So I know when you left school you travelled by yourself through China and into Mongolia and things. Could you tell us maybe a bit about that?
Sure, man. Yeah, well, actually I left school after 7th form and went to the States for about 2 years studying jazz guitar in Boston, and that was it was great. And I was like quite young, so I couldn't get into any clubs or anything like that. So I basically spent 10 hours a day practicing guitar in a little room, and
Nice.
I'd buy a Mars bar once a week as a treat. That was kind of life. And then I realised the school was pretty conservative, really, in terms of what I was getting into musically. So I thought I'll come back, and I went to music school in Wellington, Victoria University, which at the time the teachers there were Ross Harris, Jack Boddy, John Southis, Alan Thomas, who's like kind of pivotal for me doing something like this. But
Right.
Alan's was a ethnomusicology lecturer there, and he, as a kind of an aside, like when I was there studying, this is like in the late 90s, Chris O'Connor, the wonderful drummer, he was also studying ethnomusicology and started doing a study, I think for a master's, on primitive art group.
Okay.
And he didn't actually go through with it, but he did a few interviews. He did an interview with like maybe 3 or 4 of the people involved, and he and Alan wrote a bunch of notes and exchanged emails. And those, like 20 years later, those like interviews and notes and some of Alan's thoughts about that study became really like central to the
Right.
initial forming of my ideas around this book. But in terms of my own thing, so when I came back from being overseas for a couple of years, that was around the time that I'm sure you probably moved to Wellington around the same time, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Jeff was just starting before the space,
Mm-hmm.
but like Chris O'Connor was doing it's called the People's Improvisation Front, which was a weekly Sunday afternoon improvised session in the basement of their flat in Meehan Street.
Yes.
And I think it was Chris O'Connor, Tom Corwood and Jeff lived there. The 3 like pillars of creative music making in Wellington. And I was, so there was this sort of group of us up at doing the composition stuff up at the university, and then there was this sort of jazz school group of people who I just mentioned, and with the start of the space, that kind of like brought those 2 camps a little bit together. So that was my like first real like initiation into that kind of free music making, improvisation. And at the same time, the Plan 9 guys still had their wonderful Arthur Street studio. And I actually remember meeting Anthony. So Anthony Donaldson, who's a key figure in this book, he's a wonderful drummer. And I had seen him play, and I hadn't met Anthony yet, but I'd seen him and knew a little bit about his history and stuff. And then one day I had a rehearsal actually with Andreas Lepper, who had a space down at Arthur Street, I think, for a while. I had to use the loo, so I went upstairs and to use the loo, and Anthony was there, and that's when we met, sort of had a little chat. He was there.
In the loo?
No, he wasn't. No, he was there, like, it's like, sort of has a cigarette with, some music playing, and I was just like sitting there listening intently to it, like this, and we kind of like said hi or whatever. It was maybe like a couple of months after that I bumped into him, sort of see him around, but he, I remember the day I sort of like kind of got accepted into Anthony's world, I think, was at Olive Cafe, because pretty sure, can't exactly remember what happened, but I was there and I had quite muddy boots on because my parents were away, I was looking after their farm, and their Land Rover had broken down, and I was like trying to fix the Land Rover, and then I'd come back into town. I thought I'd get a coffee now. I don't know why. Went to Olive Cafe with all my muddy gears on, but Anthony came in for a coffee and he's like, "What have you been doing?" It's like, "I've just been fixing my granddad's Land Rover." "Oh, really?" Suddenly he was kind of interested.
Because he has Land Rovers too, right?
Well, he's like, anyone who has a Land Rover is kind of like a notch, goes up a couple of notches in Anthony's books. On my parents' farm, if there's sort of farming involved, he's also like interested. So suddenly I was like hanging out with Ant and playing music, and we got this group together, which you were sort of came in on for one or two things, which is called Po Face, which is Joe Lindsay on trombone, Marie Tom on bass, me and Anthony, and you and Chris came in for a gig or two, I think. It didn't last that long, like a year tops, but that was, we were sort of rehearsing 4 days a week, for 3 hours, 4 hours at a time. It was quite intense work. And that was really, like, that group kind of set me up for my kind of music making, really, for ever since.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And then when was it then that because I know you've obviously had like Frederick Street and or Fred's as it's affectionately known, and so tell us how that kind of transition happened there, because I know from Fred's that almost like paralleled a lot of or followed on from what happened with the Space and Happy and things, which was almost like another development of the scene again.
Yeah, well, so the Space started, let's say, around 99 or 2000, and Jeff Henderson was the initiator and the main driver, for sure, of that whole thing. And that was in Newtown, and then 2002 I went over, that's when I went to Mongolia, China, did this whole sort of epic trip, ended up in England. I lived there for like 5 years. And I went back and forth after that, but I came back in the mid-2000s, and at that time the Space had moved to Happy, and when I got back I was sort of involved in playing and hanging out and sort of helping out at Happy, which is Jeff was, driving that project too, and then he wanted to sort of get out of doing that and sold it. I don't know if he sold it for any money, but he kind of like got rid of that project. And it was at that time I was living in a flat in Moxham Ave with like, up to like 12 people in this like crazy old, amazing house. But I was like, I need somewhere to play, I need some space, I need something. So I was on the lookout for a place, and it just sort of like happened that at the time Jeff got out of Happy, I got in touch with the family, the Murdoch family, who made pickles and chutneys. Right. They had a factory down the road on Taranaki Street, and next door to the factory on Frederick Street was this old Chinese mission hall that Plant 9 had for a while after Arthur Street, and before them like Phoenix Foundation had been in there. So it was it was known as a music space, but it had been unoccupied for a while. And I actually called Murdoch's, it was called like Kiwi Foods or something like that. I got the number, it was an Auckland number, the factory had long closed. This lady answered, and I said, I'm after someone who owns this building, and she just happened, she's not us, but I happened to have his number still stuck on the wall. It might still be good, so I called this guy, and we started renting that old church for $300 a week, which is pretty. I remember we had from another project I did with Chris. Probably, I think I remember there was about 3 or 4 months worth of rent in the bank. So let's say $1,000 or whatever. I was like, okay, well, let's just start renting it and see what happens. And it's just been kind of going since then. So that was a direct continuation from first Happy, the Space, then Happy, then Fred's, and then after like 3 to 4 years, we had to get out of there and moved up to Pyramid Club where we are now. And that's so it's actually. I mean, I don't have the facts on me, but I think I would say it's probably the longest running artist-run space, if you count that as one project, which it is. Like the same people are involved. It's got to be one of the longest running spaces in the country. Definitely in Wellington. There's a few galleries and Joy and stuff, but that's like 25 years of continuous creative space in this case for like experimental music, improvised music, creative music making,
and also just branches out from that now too, right? You've created like an online resource as well, archives and different things, so it's expanded and been able to offer a gallery space and a residency and different things too, so it's really it's great. Awesome. Yeah,
it's like a crazy what's the kind of monster that the guy that the sort of scientist creates this monster that takes over his life. That's what this place is for me, for sure. Yeah. Nice. And it's still completely kind of haphazardly run, although haphazard in that it's just basically I know vaguely where everything is and what's happening, but the trouble is this is getting way off topic from talking about this book, but
it's all related.
It's okay, because you got a master plan. What I'm trying to do now is like sort of formalize how all these kind of weird processes that are just like have grown up like organically or just chaotically around like necessity and through that whole time, 15 years, so someone else can like come in and start doing bits and pieces, which is happening slowly, but man, it's a really hard job.
Yes, it's a lot, right? It's a lot to take on, which in a way I guess this is how I'm going to pull this book into it, because you've facilitated all of this community together, and which is kind of a direct result of, or a part of the lineage of what sort of Primitive Art Group and Braille and a lot of the fine people that you talk about in this book. So in a way it's a continuation of that line, which makes you the kind of perfect person to be writing about it because of your dedication to the sort of creative music community here in Pōneke. So I'm going to dial back now and have a look at this book. So just for our viewers, I guess, could you just like a short overview of what the kind of book covers? And so if I'm like to say I'm a real estate agent from Queenstown, you're trying to describe it to me,
I don't know if I could sell it to you. Yeah, I'm not a very good salesperson, but I can tell you what it's about.
Yeah, tell us what it's about. Yeah.
Okay. Real basic. I'll try and do it in like one sentence.
Okay.
So this is about more or less the pioneering free jazz and improvised music group in this country. There were definitely people that had done improvisation before these guys, but that these guys, I'm talking about Primitive Art Group, were dedicated to that, like free jazz and improvised music and composed music in their own kind of way, as the without sort of going into sort of more known genres of music, jazz and such. So it starts with the forming of this group, which is Anthony Donnells and Stuart Porter, about 1978, and follows these two. They're my main two characters, and Stuart. They're the main two people in that group creatively, but also in terms of having a story in a book. Like this book then follows how that grew into Primitive Art Group, which is 5 or 6 people, and then from that grew into what became known as the Braille Collective, which was then another sort of 5 people on top of that, plus more on the periphery, who formed a whole bunch of groups in the mid-80s, early to mid-80s. And then the story sort of follows the wrapping up of Primitive Art Group, why that happened, and these musicians sort of following different trajectories. And I guess one of the things which I tried to do, I don't know if I've done it successfully, is kind of to weave this background of the political, economic situation and context and the atmosphere of the city into their story. And it's interesting actually, if you kind of look at it with that kind of filter, why certain musical decisions were made, like following in this case the formation of a group called 6 Volts, which is the most successful of the Braille Collective groups to come out of Braille. Certain reasons why a group like why they would put energy into doing things a certain way, which became popular, and how that related to the changing economic situation and political situation in the country at the time, with like this neoliberal thing coming in, like share market crash in '87. All these things had are related to this music story, and it sort of follows that through till the early '90s, where both Stuart Porter, his music making sort of came to wound down considerably, as did the 6 Volts band. Not so much the musicians picked up again, but that group kind of came to a stop. And it seemed like, to me, it's quite a hard thing to know, was like where do you end this thing? It's quite easy to start it, but it's like it's really hard to know where to finish that, because it could have gone on through the space, happy, could have gone that whole story, but that's like massive. And so seemed to me when the 6 Volts folded in 1992, essentially that was the end of like the Braille Collective, and so that became like the stopping point for the book. Right. So yeah, it's broadly the decade of the 1980s.
That's the frame.
Yeah. Improvised underground music making in Wellington. And the thing I found, which I had to these guys are not widely known outside of our circles and a few others. And so it was like I'm telling their story. But all along the way, there's all these interesting people cropping up within that story, because they touch on all this other art making, music making, theatre, dance, all this really interesting stuff, which I've included lots of in there, but it was constantly drawing me away from like the essential story of those guys. Thread. So I had to keep like reminding myself, don't write them out of their own story. Make sure you sort of like always are focused on those characters.
Yes. Was there anything like in the process of developing this book and doing your research and everything, was there anything that kind of really took you by surprise in terms of, I mean, we know these people as friends, as part of the community, but I guess when you dig a bit deeper, there's always things you find. Was there anything that really struck you in terms of like what you were talking about before, about the environment that they were living in, and the sort of maybe that was there a tension at all between kind of more mainstream music and the, I guess, the formation of the New Zealand music industry and that body, and to what they were doing as sort of like outsiders, really? Did anything at all kind of...
Yeah, in terms of surprises, well, I don't know if there was that many kind of like... I mean, there were surprises all along the way in terms of discoveries of like things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every photo, there's a whole bunch of photos in that book. I can tell a story about every photo and how it sort of came to find it and sort of what it means to that story. And so all these kind of interesting discoveries were certainly, if not surprising, they were like, it's like being a detective almost doing this job, you know.
Forensic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things, like I know the Wellington-based musicians who are still Wellington-based in this book, but I didn't know Stuart Porter. I met Stuart. No, I don't know if I had actually. Before I interviewed him for the first time, that was 10 years ago, 2014. He came up here, he played at Pyramid Club. We sat down, we did several interviews of several hours each over a few days. And meeting Stuart I didn't realise quite the central creative force that Stuart was in this story. That was like, that was something that I realised after talking with him and then sort of going on and sort of doing more research was, you know, Stuart and Ant started it, but Stuart's really pushing with ideas and compositions, also the whole, you know, the records, the artwork, all this work going on. He's right in there with lots of energy doing that. So it was really great sort of getting to know Stuart and getting to know what, how much work and energy he has put into this scene. Because you know, living here, he's moved away quite a while ago, and I don't know if musicians, I don't know, like if saxophone players in Wellington know who Stuart Porter is. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because you listen to his recordings, I've got heaps of them. Like, he's a phenomenal saxophone player. And no, he never got taught any note on the saxophone. He taught himself everything.
Yeah, right.
So he's completely self-taught, got his own concepts of music, and started this thing with Anthony, which is, you know, whether or not we would be here doing music like we do, I don't know, but certainly it's influenced several generations of musicians, you know. So that was a really nice part of doing this research. And, you know, the thing I love about doing that is meeting people and talking to them. I could do that.
Yeah.
And just listening to people's stories. So I ended up talking to at least 50 or 60 people, interviewing them for this book, quite wide into political activists, people like Deborah Buston, the artist, Rose Beecham, all these people who were sort of touching on this story. So, and kind of finding those people and listening to them and their stories, that was, that was like a real joy. That was the most fun part, probably.
Right.